Hello, everyone, and welcome to my very special Halloween special. In previous years, I've done things like Stephen King month, and in other years, I've talked about my favorite horror movie, Nightmare on Elm Street. But this year, I want to take a look at a movie that was made for so little that it became a pop culture phenomenon. Let's talk about The Evil Dead. The Evil Dead is a case study in how independent filmmaking really got turned into a big thing, because The Evil Dead is a film that relies off of a very simple script. I'd say this is the simplest of any of the scripts that The Evil Dead has ever had. A group of kids go into a cabin in the woods, good so far, and none of them make it out alive. Pretty good stuff. But the stipulation is that they find an evil book, the Necronomicon Ex Mortis, as well as a recording from a researcher who managed to research a bunch of the stuff relating to the Deadites and all that stuff. And they basically summon the dead and they all die. Pretty simple stuff, right? Well, as much as it's simplistic, it's the direction that causes the film to be a huge cult following. Because Sam Raimi at the time was such a inexperienced director, he had various ideas of what could be like different types of shots. This film was so low budget that they couldn't afford basic like equipment like a dolly or one of those cam holders. They had to basically take the camera, like imagine my camera here. They put it on a 2x4, strap it down, and then for the shots where, you see the point of view of the Evil Dead, like the demons and whatnot, it's the POV, and they just take the 2x4, go like this. And that's how they do the whole shaky cam thing. And that's like basic stuff. Like, that's finding a very good resource for the littlest amount of money. Because, again, we're operating off a budget of $350,000. Most of it is going towards makeup and blood and transportation and food, hospitality, stuff like that, right? It's a pretty small budget. And at times in this film, if you see the original cut at least, you can see the amount of effort and details that the film was put through. Even though in the original cuts of the film, you could see like tubes sticking out of people's necks, right? For like the blood effects and whatnot. Even with all these little tiny imperfections in the film, there's so many imperfections in the original film. If you see it on DVD or on VHS, you'll notice these little details that are just so amateur by today's standards, but it's done in a way that people don't necessarily give a shit about. Like, it's not the most well-made movie, but it is made well. And what I mean by that is that the director and the crew had such a vision for the film. The way the film utilizes Dutch angles, the creativeness of like the kills in this film, the creative essence of how the dead, possess people's bodies or do insane things, like, and even the efforts by actors to do whatever they could. Like, Bruce Campbell did a lot of his own stunts in this movie, including having to break a shelf with his own body. Like, that's crazy. But there's other things about this movie that are creative. There's like this one scene where, Ash has to put his hand, he puts his hand through a mirror and it's just like a watery effect. And it's that effect that's like really awesome. And there's a lot of creative stuff like this, and they even use like stop motion animation for like the decomposing scenes. And it just adds to this interesting layer of creative ability for such a small budget. And again, this is a case study where budgets don't necessarily matter. It's what you do with the budget that matters. And The Evil Dead is a testament to that. However, if it's one thing that I personally don't necessarily like about the movie, it's one scene. And it's a scene that Sam Raimi has gone on to say that he will never do anything like it again. It's a scene that is so bad, and it was poorly received, that it even caused the film to be taken to court in the United Kingdom because of how gratuitous it was. And a couple years after this, with Evil Dead 2, he had to appear on the United Kingdom, like, a sort of television show to basically discuss not only his film, but also the genre of horror.
Those girls were watching a scene from a horror film called Evil Dead 1, which broke all financial records in the cinema and as a home video when released 4 years ago. Yet it was attacked by some as being no more than a video nasty, and the Department of Public Prosecutions took court action to ban it. The action actually failed, but the arguments will rage again when its sequel, Evil Dead 2, hits the cinema screens next week. Its American director Sam Raimi is with us tonight, and we're also joined by Gerald Howarth, who would like to see films like that banned. Sam, let me just ask you first of all as to why it's important to show people being dismembered. There was actually a scene in Evil Dead 1, I don't know if any of our audience has seen it at all, but of a woman being raped by, of all things, a tree. Now, how necessary is it to have those kind of scenes in horror films today?
Well, I don't think it's necessary specifically to have any particular type of scene in a horror picture. There is a particular sequence in the woods with a woman where the trees come to life and she is attacked by them, it's true.
And she was raped by them by the looks of things.
Well, you don't really see anything, so it's really up to the imagination of the viewer.
I actually watched the film today. I was told to watch it today. It was pretty clear to me what was going on.
Well, okay. Well, there was a scene in the picture that did have a sequence of woman in the woods, and her clothes were certainly torn off, and it was a fantasy, and I don't think that I personally would repeat that sequence again had I the chance to rewrite the picture, but I wrote it when I was 18 years old.
I think because of the backlash that the first film got in regards to the tree scene, it definitely affected how the Evil Dead 2 was made. What I see in the Evil Dead 2 is a transitionary point where he starts to mix comedy within the horror and playing up a little bit more of the goofier angles, and it is something that does affect his work even after the Evil Dead series is done. It even is in things like Drag Me to Hell. What I find unique about the Evil Dead is that in a landscape of horror movies from the 80s, 90s, whatever, out of all those, a majority of the film's final protagonists that are still left alive are women. It's a rule in horror that women usually are the final girl or the final victim, right? But in a rare case in the 80s, Ash Williams, a character that isn't necessarily the same character as we see in the Evil Dead 2 or Army of Darkness, well, he's the final person. He's the final victim. It's rare that a male character could be a final victim in a slasher movie or a horror movie in the 80s. Because let's really think about it for a second. How many times in horror have there been male leads who have been the final person? I mean, we got like Heather Langenkamp in Nightmare on Elm Street. I guess you could say Nightmare on Elm Street 2 with, I think his name was Jesse, right? You know, you could say that. I mean, it's one of those rare cases, I guess. The Evil Dead obviously had an effect on horror that would even stem even through today. Not only did the franchise grow big with Evil Dead 2, Army of Darkness, the remake in the early 2000s, the TV show, various comic spin-offs, and other things, but it also inspired various filmmakers as well, like Eli Roth, who did Cabin Fever, and obviously Drew Goddard, who did Cabin in the Woods. A pretty direct homage to Evil Dead, but with a twist of the whole, like, oh yeah, like, this is just, you know, a yearly ritual thing. I'll discuss that film at some point, but it's really good. So why am I bringing up all this? Why am I bringing up the fact that The Evil Dead is such an influential movie for indie filmmakers as well as filmmakers today? Why am I bringing up the fact that it was revolutionary in various other ways? Why am I bringing all this up? Well, I think there needs to be a case for the preservation of the original cut of the film. Because, as you see, kids, after the DVD release of The Evil Dead, Sam Raimi kind of took inspiration from George Lucas and started to mess around with the film. I can understand adding things like HDR to a film, maybe heighten up the little color palettes, maybe here and there, you know, fixing up the sound a little bit. Like, things like that makes sense. But the film itself does various things. Like, Sam Raimi does various things with this film that it just kind of irks me. You know how I mentioned that there was like, a tube sticking out of someone's neck in one scene that was just spurting blood and you could see the tube and whatnot? Got digitally edited out. If you want to know more about the changes to the Evil Dead movie, I'd suggest checking out this highlight video from YMS's highlight channel. It goes into pretty big detail about the whole, changes to the Evil Dead and how it's not necessarily the changes that we hate, but it's the fact that we don't have a high definition version of the original movie that we could watch as well as the other one. When you have things like the colorized edition on the It's a Wonderful Life Blu-ray, but you could also have the black and white version, I wish we would have something like, hey, here's a high definition version of the original film, and then here's a high definition version of the film that we made that has, the various special additions to it. Again, it's a film that I would argue is in need to be preserved correctly, and that is to not cover up the mistakes. Yes, older films have mistakes, especially for directors, things like camera shots aren't good, or maybe this effect wasn't so great, or things like that. I think the essence, if you're going to be a filmmaker, is to love the films that you made in your past. Of course, I don't like some of the films I've made in my past. Some of them are really boring, dumb, sometimes pretentious, but at the same time, I can enjoy them as part of my history. The fact that The Evil Dead is part of Sam Raimi's history, it's also part of film history. It's also part of the history of pop culture. It's part of the history of horror. And when you disregard that fact by releasing a different cut of a movie that has changes that dramatically affect the feel of the movie, it just doesn't work. Things like maybe touching up the colors isn't such a bad thing, right? Touching up the sound isn't that bad of a thing. But when you go in and start editing out certain things, when you start shading in certain sections with CG or, doing various things that take away the feel of the film, you just kind of ruin the historical factor of it all, right? And I'd argue that to preserve film is to preserve it as it originally is, flaws and all. So, just because there's a tube sticking out of one of your actors' necks for the blood spurt doesn't mean you should cover it up because you feel so insecure about it. I think it's something that needs to be preserved in its best essence. And that best essence is allowing it to be itself without the need to cover it up with CG. And that's something that a lot of films need. I mean, of course, we have factors like a director's cut or an editor's cut. Those things are just superfluous. We're just talking about the original film, and we want the original film to be in its original place. So, I hope someday that Sam Raimi and Sony come back together and just go, you know what? We're just going to release the original cut of the film. People have been demanding it. No more CG. We need the original prints. Put it in HDR. Put it on 4K. That's what we need. At the end of the day, though, The Evil Dead is still a very influential film. I love it to death, flaws and all. If you can find the original DVD copy of the film or have it on VHS, definitely check it out, because all the other versions that are out there is the edited version, and it just sucks that we can't get an original version of the film that's in HD. It just sucks. But at the end of it all, I'm going to give The Evil Dead a B+. Thank you guys so much for watching my review of The Evil Dead, and that's my Halloween special. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Have a safe and wonderful Halloween with your friends and family, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.
I fear that the only way to stop those possessed by the spirits of the book is through the act of bodily dismemberment.
I don't care what happens to her. She's your girlfriend, you take care of her.